Hello and welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So today I'm just going to be chatting about 808 State's album Gorgeous from the 1st of February 1993. And in the direction I'm sort of taking this series, I am deliberately picking albums now where I, have a deep musical relationship in terms of basically buying them around the time they came out. I think that's where I'm going with this, because it makes it much more interesting for me as opposed to choosing albums that maybe were better received at the time, but I didn't have quite the same level of musical involvement in terms of just listening to the album over and over again. So as a consequence, like this one, we're going to go through albums that maybe are not so well known, or particularly in the case of this, you could argue that this album marked a decline in their popularity, certainly in the UK. And as I've said on numerous occasions, this is obviously going to be UK centric because it's all part of, that lived musical experience for me going through this. So hopefully, even if you're watching it from a part of the world where you're not fully aware of the UK charts at the time, I'm hoping you'll sort of get some abstract appreciation through your own engagement with similar albums, or just any album, and it'll sort of what's the word I'm looking for here? It would just bring up, and you think, oh yeah, I had a similar relationship with so and so album by this band. So that's really what I'm trying to do here. If you're not familiar with the album, is just try and kindle those nice flourishing feelings when you think, I have similar experience with another album. So that's another angle on this ongoing series to keep it interesting for me. So this came out 1st of February 1993. It was actually the fourth studio album. It was released by ZTT Records and Tommy Boy Records in the US. Now, it was reissued with additional bonus tracks, including 14 remix tracks. The album peaked on number 35 on Billboard's Top Heat Seeker album charts, and it peaked at number 17 on the UK album charts. You'll see in a moment, it went into the UK charts, relatively speaking, like super fast. It was released on the 1st of February, and it was within a couple of weeks, actually. And we'll see that when we go through the sort of chart lens for this. I got into the band from their previous album XL in 91. Prior to that, I'd been aware of their singles on the charts. Out of the two albums, although this didn't do as well as XL, and they're the two albums I own, I actually preferred this one, and I was trying to put my finger on it. Before I did the episode today, I had a very quick re-listen to the two albums, and I was trying to work out why I enjoyed this more. And they make a mention in here about, and you can see how it might be related to the title Gorgeous, but I'd always associated the band through their previous album as XL, as they say here, with these sort of thumping beats. They had very heavy dance feel, but the sound on a lot of their tracks was quite aggressive, and they had these sawtooth waves. And for someone like me that was coming in from hard rock, metal, and then alternative an indie, I really liked that harder edge to the synth sound initially. But I think what was happening at this point through exposure to trip hop, I was developing a bit more of an ear for the chiller side of dance music, the sort of chill out. I'm trying to think if this was at a point where I'd got into the orbit or not. I don't think so. Orbital. And the orb may have been around this time, or a little bit earlier. But I was definitely developing. My ear was going into those lusher, and that's what I like about this album. Yeah, there we go. There's something undeniably luscious about the soundscapes here. So even though there are tracks on here which still maintain that sort of harder edge and the sawtooth sound, they were elements of lushness were coming in. The other thing that particularly interested me around about this time, I think, was I was buying an electronics magazine about making electronic music, and there was an interesting article in there from a member of the band where they were talking about how instead of trying to get clearance on samples for loops, what the band did was they actually recreated loops using modern electronic equipment, which I found fascinating. So that's really my positioning in getting into the band. Now, with that in mind, if we look at their discography from the point of view of the albums, you can see here we've got New Build 88, 90 and 89, Excel 91, so that's when I got into them, Gorgeous 93, and then really after that I didn't really carry on listening to the band that much. Track-wise on the album, again they're using guest musicians. So Ian McCulloch is from Echo and the Bunnymen. I think previously on Excel they'd used, let me just find it here, I don't think it lists it, but I'm sure, Bernard Sumner and York as well. So that's something else that always interested me, is that they were using guest vocalists from indie bands as opposed to, say, like R&B singers, guest singers from more, I suppose, traditional dance and disco. We'll also see in a moment when we go through the chart positions to get us on some sort of timeline here in terms of what else was going on in the UK. You see how it aligns against other dance acts which were maybe doing different flavours. Sorry. So yeah. I was just scrolling through, because there's not as much information on Wikipedia as normally when I do this. Again, I was just trying to place them on a general timeline and the sort of things that they were getting involved with, because there's a lot of bands like this that have influenced later artists, but they in themselves have remixed other artists as well. A lot of these bands got involved in remix work, and I was also curious as to where the band were in terms of band members. So it's one of those bands where there's a core member, and according to this the band is still going there since 1988. Then these two original members had left by the time that Gorgeous was released. So Gerald Simpson, the first one to go in 89, and then Martin Price in 91. Since then, you can see there's been other members. There was a member that joined in 89 when Gerald Simpson left. They left in 2015. And another person that joined around the same time, and they left in 2021. But Graham Massey is like the core behind 808 State. And again with this, I'll include links as relevant, including a link to Graham Massey's page on Wikipedia. If you don't know, 808 State were named after Massey's favourite drum machine, the Roland TR-808, and I'm going to talk a little bit about drum machines at the end, because they always bring a smile to my face. And I think I'm going to do an episode in the same week this goes out, or for Things That Spark Joy, where I'll just on camera, we'll have a look at my 626. I won't start doing any drum patterns, but I just think it's a really interesting machine aesthetically, even though it wasn't particularly well respected at the time. So moving on, it was no surprise for me to see when these are ranked by popularity on Album of the Year. It's so far down the list. I don't think it's, generally that well regarded against other stuff. But I really like the album. So give it a listen on Spotify or Apple Music or Google or Amazon, and see what you reckon. I'd be interested in anybody that's watching this who hasn't listened to the album before, and just listen to a couple of tracks quickly off of XL versus Gorgeous, and just give me your opinion, even if you hate it. But I'd be interested in whether you find that same contrast between this slightly harder edge here, and even though there are some tracks on here with that harder edge, because I think one of the tracks was used on a soundtrack, there's a lushness to this, and I wasn't surprised to see this album up here as well from 89 as the most popular on Album of the Year. So let's look at their general popularity on the charts. I'm going to start off with the album, and then we'll move on to the single side of things. So you can see XL was definitely their most popular album, got to number 4, was on the chart for 10 weeks. Gorgeous, which is what today's episode's about, peaked at number 17, was on the chart for 3 weeks on the album chart. And then after that, there was this, I'm assuming this was a compilation album from 98. But yeah, really, you can see when they peaked in 91, and I suppose maybe this style of music was just going out of fashion at the time. And, as I've said, a lot of these episodes are going to be on 93, and for me, 93 is one of those awesome years for music. But the downside is, when you've got a lot of stuff, something has to get pushed to the background. And I think a lot of these bands that peaked, 89 into the 90s, into 91, that were dance acts, particularly UK dance acts, with a certain sound in the in that period, interesting period of sampling loops. They just started to fall off, as it got later into the 90s. So the week that it was new on the charts, as it is at number 17, this is a week we've seen before, because it was the same week that Star by Belly got onto the charts. They got in at number 2. Now, I think, the difference is that was the previous week, so Gorgeous got on the chart faster in terms of Belly, but Belly got up higher. And yeah, we've already seen this chart from last week, so I'll just scroll through it quickly so you can just see again Boss Drum by the Shaman. That was already out, so unfortunately I'm not going to do this in an episode. Some point down the line I'm thinking about doing like a favourite albums, or sorry, that's not right, going through chronologically from a certain point in time after I was born and looking at going through each year and looking at albums that had a real big impact on my musical listening, and certainly Boss Drum would be one of those by the Shaman. So yeah, I don't know quite when I'm going to start doing that, but yeah, it's something I'm thinking about doing. Now, I thought it'd be interesting to look at something I've not really done before is bring up this chart on Wikipedia, which is most of the bands with some degree of chart success have a singles table. So you can again just see where we are. So there was 4 tracks off the album. Now the album, as we've said, came out 1st of February 93, and yeah, there was already a couple of tracks out before that. Unfortunately, none of this is documented on Wikipedia. There are probably other ways I could find out release dates, things like that, but I am purely just going to go through when they hit the charts on the UK charts for this episode. The one that did the best was 1 in 10, which was actually a UB40, a remix of a UB40 track, which is an interesting choice as well. I think most of these, not surprisingly, like 10 times 10, particularly, again, the slightly harder dance tracks. And as I've said, I really like the sort of more mellower, lusher tracks on the album. So if we look at the singles generally, just as an overview for this band, again you can sort of see a pattern emerging here to some degree. So if you have any awareness of 808 State, probably these are the two, Cubic and In Your Face. They had a real hard sound on them, and I got the impression a lot of people that liked heavier music, if they were going to get attracted to particular tracks by a dance band, then these were probably the two that would do it, Cubic and In Your Face. But you can see certainly their, golden years in terms of the single success were this period in singles from, the second and third album. And then as we hit the singles from Gorgeous, things are slightly starting to peter off. But again, we see, 98, we got a reissue of Pacific and Cubic, and that does reasonably well on the charts. But definitely this album sees the band, losing chart popularity, really. So, first one we're going to look at is a track that was released prior to the album, but is on the album. So that got to number 59. So didn't even get on the top 40. A at all. The week that it got on the chart, let's have a look, see what else was on there. So Rhythm is a Dancer by Snap. And I would say at that point, that's the sort of dance music I was, aware of getting in the charts to higher positions. Things like Rhythm is a Dancer by Snap, Too Unlimited. There's a lot of Eurodance kicking around alongside the other more, indie rock and other things. Annie Lennox had a single out. That looks like a sort of cover of Baker Street, I'm assuming. I'm just trying to see if there's anything I really remember from this period. So, 92, end of 92 was this. Let's have a look. 23rd of August 92. So I don't know how much I was listening to the radio in that period, so I would have been very ensconced in buying albums. I had a rock set track. There was also that Das Boot track, so that ties to the film. It's a great film to watch that, very claustrophobic. I remember that being on the BBC. I think I've got a copy of that on DVD somewhere in the house, actually. Yeah, very interesting film. Wow. There it is. 1 week on the chart. Belinda Carlisle. Mr. Lover Man by Shabba Ranks. Oh, Betty Boo as well. Next up we have 1 in 10, which is the UB40, the remix they did for UB40, which is on the album. And that got to number 17, so it did actually break the top 40. It was on there for 8 weeks. And that was, its chart run. So the highest position was 17. It had gone in new at 21. And I always look at the highest position when I'm doing these. So let's do exactly that. Oh dear. I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston. I think we've seen that a few times now. A lot of crossover. There's a Forever People by The Shaman. Boney M Megamix. Oh, Outer Space by The Prodigy. I should definitely do some sort of episode about them. I'm trying to think when Fat of the Land came out. But certainly if there were any Prodigy albums in 93, was it? I'm just trying to remember actually whether Music for the Jilted Generation was out this year. Anyway, if it is, there'll definitely be an episode on that. Oh, there's 1 in 10. Gloria Estefan. I was a big fan of Gloria Estefan around this time, maybe a little bit earlier actually. All the Lemonheads. Wedding Present. It's quite a lot of poppy indie kicking around. Must have been a remix of Temptation by Heaven 17. And the ubiquitous boy bands as well. Next up we have Plan 9. So, hit the charts, was that the 30th of 1st, 93. So that's, just before the release of the album that was released. It only got to number 50. And there's Whitney still, Exterminate by Snap, No Limits to Unlimited, Sister Sledge, Faith No More, I'm Easy, Beloved, Ordinary World by Duran Duran. Oh, there was they re-released She Sells Sanctuary, Forever People. See, this period I'm a little bit more aware of, and it could possibly be. So I think this was a period when I went from working in a lab as a quality control manager to working in an office. When I decided I wanted to shift along to more IT, and I sort of went in a bit of a roundabout way, and I was a contract chaser in an accounting office for a little while. And just towards the end of my first job, we'd started being allowed to have radios in the lab. So I think that's why I have a better memory of the singles charts of this period, because it had just kicked in. And then the final single, this 10 by 10, again, doing even worse, doesn't get anywhere near the top 40. I'll see how far the charts go down actually for this one, because I always have trouble remembering at this point whether it's top 75 or top 100. So we're right down here. So let's scroll down and just see, top 75. So just gets in the even being recorded at all. 1 week, unfortunately. So let's just scroll in the other direction. Oh, Ugly Kid Joe. Thunder, wow. Oh, that one. Yeah, Resurrection. Brian May. Because Brian May was having solo hits around that time. Oh, I'd completely forgotten about that. This is why I don't do any preparation, because that's the point, or very little apart from creating these. This, I actually remember buying the video because initially they maintained that they were going to be a video only band, and then of course they had no intention of doing that. Three Little Pigs by Green Jelly. Some more Snap, Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls had come back into the charts, because that was from the 80s. Two Princes by the Spin Doctors. Wow. What Is Love by Hadaway, Dreams. So when was this? Yeah, 30th of June 1993. I think I changed jobs a bit later in the year. Maybe. All That She Wants by Ace of Base. Oh, this brings back memories. I don't think I'd gone back to clubbing at this point. I think it was later in the 90s when me and a mate used to go out on a Thursday night to a local club. Dance the night away. Wow. Was in People as well. So in terms of their what was happening around that time, I'm now going to move in and talk about the connection to the drum machine side of things, because this is something I picked on when I was reminded of, should I say, when I was going through and creating the tabs for this. So as I've already said, and anybody that knows the band will know that they're named after this thing, the TR-808, 1980 to 1983. Manufactured by Roland Corporation. It was one of the first drum machines to allow users to program rhythms instead of using preset patterns. So its competitor was the more expensive Lin LM1. I've never used one of these. I'm going to do, and I'm pretty sure I've said it already, I'm going to do a Things That Spark Joy episode where I'll show on camera my 626 and reminisce about the period in which I used it. As you can see here, this was so this, you know, very much predates 808 State as the band, and this drum machine is associated with people like Afrika Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force and Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye. So I'll definitely include a link to that. Drum machines, I think, are an interesting rabbit hole to go down. Yeah. And I reckon if anybody's got like a slight interest in collecting vintage analog gear, I bet there's some interesting budget drum machines that you can collect. I bet, you know, some of these probably now are, well, I know certain Roland gear is very expensive, but I bet there's some interesting other gear that was mass produced where you could, you know, just set up a really interesting collection of like 5 old drum machines. Yeah, I shouldn't give myself ideas. So yeah, I wanted to bring this up because the Roland TR-505 was released in 86. So it's a sort of family of drum machines which includes the 808. So the 909, the 808, the 707, the 626 and the 606. Notice, this is very amusing, the one that I have doesn't even have an entry on Wikipedia. Maybe, see, it doesn't even mention the 727. So the idea was that this 626 is, I suppose, a variant of the 606 in some ways. Well, actually, that's not right because it looks completely different. Yeah, I'm never sure with Roland's numbering systems, because you can see here the 727 is the Latin style drum sounds version of the 707, and that's what the 626 was to me, but it was in a 505 chassis. So yeah, I don't know what that was all about. I mean, as we know with all sorts of things, other products, companies do weird things with serial numbers based on when it comes out, what it's similar to, and, you know, when you think you've established a pattern, that's not always the case. But yeah, the layout here of a 505 is identical pretty much to a 626. It's just the samples are different. But what I also wanted to talk about is the Boss range, which is the Dr. Rhythm. So a friend of mine who I used to play with, he was the first one of us to get a drum machine, and he got a DR101, and I used to love this. This was great fun to use. And here's the service notes. It basically looks like this. Now, the really, I suppose you could say the famous Dr. Rhythm is the DR55. And wasn't it the DR55 that was used by Sisters of Mercy at some point? I'm not sure. I always get confused because Dr. Avalanche, which was the name of their drum machine, yeah, their drum machines changed. They may have been using a Lin at some point. But yeah, it's certain, you know, if you remember these, there's something, yeah, nice just about, even though they were so simple. I just love this grid on the DR110. So yeah, of the drum machines I got exposed most to, it was this initially, and then the 626 variant of this. Another friend that I did music with at some point a lot later in the late 90s, 2000s, had a really nice, I think it was an Alesis, which I think at that point the Alesis drum machine, and I can't remember the model, had become like the sort of standard for drum machines, for reasonably priced drum machines. If you don't know, Boss are under the Roland umbrella. So pretty cool. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode and a little bit of a sidetrack down drum machines, but you can see why. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode.